During World War II, at the end of September 1943, 20-year-old George Ritchie was on his way to Camp Berkeley, Texas, to do basic training. The conditions at the camp were cold and dusty, which made the exercises difficult, and his health quickly deteriorated, leaving him with a severe lung condition and a high fever. On December the 20th, he was admitted to hospital. When he woke up, he found himself in a small, dimly lit room, where his surroundings became a dizzy blur. He jumped out of bed, but his uniform was not on the chair, and he looked around, and saw a young man lying in the bed he had just left, unaware that the young man was himself. He quickly ran from the room and out into the hallway, where he saw a sergeant walking towards him carrying a tray. He approached the sergeant to ask him a question, but he was ignored, and the man walked past him as if he wasn't there. At this stage, George had not realised that as far as the sergeant was concerned, he was invisible. But as he was standing there, wondering whether it was all a dream, he suddenly found himself outside the hospital. It was dark, and he was moving fast, as though he were flying through the air. He did not feel cold. He then found himself on a street corner near a river where people were walking past him, and just like the sergeant, they ignored him, as if he were invisible. He went to lean against a pole, but fell straight through it. He came to the reality that he had lost his body, which was why people could not see him. He realised that he had to get back to his physical body as fast as he could. His return to the hospital was fast, and he proceeded to run through the wards in search of his body, and when he identified it through the ring on his finger, he found it covered in a sheet. It was then that he realised that his separation from his body was death. But how could he be lying there dead, yet was still wide awake? All of a sudden, the room was illuminated, where an intense light appeared. It was during this out-of-body experience where George Ritchie would be taken through several different regions of the afterlife. Whilst there, he witnessed negative energy of people full of hatred. But everything suddenly changed when he was taken into a large university-type building. On his arrival, the scene in front of him kept changing, and the quality of light looked different. It looked as though the air had suddenly become more transparent, allowing him to see what had apparently been there all along. It seems that at the beginning of his out-of-body experience, he was shown a scene out of hell with trapped souls, but beyond that, he began to perceive a completely new realm, with enormous buildings standing in a beautiful sunny park. There appeared to be a relationship between the various structures with a pattern to the way they were arranged. To George, it looked like well-planned universities, but the universities he had known in reality looked like piecemeal reproductions compared to this. He then entered a completely different dimension, like another kind of existence that looked totally peaceful. As he and his guide entered one of the buildings, they then went down a high-ceilinged corridor lined with tall doorways. It was so quiet, and he was suddenly startled to see people in the passageway. As he observed them, he couldn't tell if they were women or men, young or old, because they were all covered from head to toe in loose flowing hooded cloaks, not dissimilar to a monk's habit. But the atmosphere was different to that of a monastery, and more like a large study centre. Everyone they passed in the halls and the curved staircases appeared to be caught up in some engrossing activity, yet nobody was talking amongst themselves, but he felt no tension or unfriendliness between them. They appeared distant because they were in total concentration and self-absorbed in some purpose beyond themselves. As George continued to gaze through open doors, he saw enormous rooms filled with complex equipment. In some of the rooms, he observed the strange hooded figures bent over detailed charts and diagrams, and some were sitting at the controls of elaborate consoles with flickering lights. While George had a certain amount of scientific education at university, where he majored in chemistry and studied some biology, physics and calculus, and various scientific activities, what he had seen was way beyond anything he knew. He couldn't even hazard a guess at what field they were in. It looked like some huge experiment or experiments were being carried out. Whatever way he looked at it, he was really curious as to what they were doing. He sensed that all of the activity he had seen on the mysterious campus was being powered by some incredible source or God. Instead of being chastised for his ignorance or curiosity, what he felt was communicated was love and compassion, an understanding that encompassed all his non-understanding. With George's obvious delight in the beings around him, he sensed that this was not the whole story, and he was observing only a small part of it, and that there were far greater things to see. He followed his guide into other buildings in this giant domain of thought, and entered a studio where music of amazing complexity was being played, so much so that he couldn't even begin to follow what was being composed and performed. He was hearing complicated rhythms, tones, not on any scale that he knew, and found himself thinking to himself, why, Bach is only the beginning. They then walked through a library the size of the whole University of Richmond, with rooms lined floor to ceiling with documents on parchment, clay, leather, metal, paper. He thought to himself, this looks like an assembly of every important book or document of the universe. This was a difficult concept to come to terms with, because how could books be written somewhere beyond the earth? But his imagination persisted with the key works of the universe. As they strolled around the domed reading rooms, crowded with silent scholars, the door to one of the smaller rooms abruptly slammed shut. Could that be the central thought of this earth? But there were even more things to see that would spark George's imagination as they moved back across the quiet park and into a building that was crowded with technological machinery, into a strange sphere-shaped structure where a catwalk led them over a tank of what appeared to be ordinary water, and then into what looked like huge laboratories which might have been some kind of space observatory. His sense of curiosity grew, and he thought to himself, is this heaven? The calm, the brightness was certainly heaven-like, with the absence of self and ego. When these people were on earth, did they grow beyond selfish desires? But if growth continues, then this was not all there is, and there must be something even these beings lacked. He wondered if it was the same thing missing in the lower realm. The lower realm generally refers to a plane of existence characterized by suffering, negativity, and lower vibrational energies, where individuals experience the consequences of negative karma. So, was it the truth that they were single-mindedly pursuing? Who were the beings in that heavenly environment? Were they actually planning something that was to become real on Earth at a later date? And if so, what does this tell us about life now? Does this experience of George Ritchie explain why certain people seem to be able to forecast the future with some degree of accuracy? George Ritchie left the spirit world after suddenly waking up, much to the astonishment of the physician who just signed his death certificate. An orderly who was preparing to move his body to the morgue had noticed signs of life in his body and quickly notified the doctor, who immediately injected adrenaline directly into his heart. George had been dead for 9 minutes, but had shown no signs of brain damage. George went on to serve in the army during World War II and went on to become a psychiatrist.